My mother died and left everything to the woman who stole my childhood. That sentence sat on my kitchen table in black ink and legal font for 3 hours before my hands stopped shaking enough to pick up the phone. I had been on the other end of that house for 20 years. I cooked, cleaned, handled doctors, sat through her insomnia, watched her fade. The woman who signed as sole beneficiary was someone who moved in when I was 16. She called herself a friend. She called herself a helper. She called herself family. She never once called me by my name. The first crack was slow. She arrived the winter I started high school. My mother said she needed company. The woman showed up with casseroles and a laugh that filled the house. She taught my mother to repaint the kitchen, to take long baths, to stop visiting my father in prison. She sat in my bedroom at night and asked questions. She listened when I tried to talk about college and shifted the conversation to how tired my mother looked. She made me feel selfish for wanting a life outside the house. By my senior year, I was doing both parents' laundry, driving my mother to appointments, answering calls at midnight. I missed my prom because my mother needed someone to stay with her. I missed a scholarship interview because she panicked when the woman rearranged pills in the cabinet without telling anyone. The woman always had a way of making it my fault. I complained to my sister at first, who told me to breathe, that my mother was lonely, that adults made choices. A therapist later told me the word for what was happening: enmeshment. At the time, it just felt like survival. The woman had eaten my childhood in small bites. Freedom, privacy, the right to be a teenager. She took it quietly. There were no slaps, no prison bars. There were casseroles and soft eyes and a slow replacement. When my mother died, it wasn't dramatic. It was a long, flat goodbye in hospice. The woman sat by the bed and held my mother's hand the whole time. I stood in the doorway while she whispered things into my mother's ear and told her what a beautiful life they had led. I watched the woman smooth the blankets, then walk out with my mother's dog and my mother's car keys. At the funeral, she wore my mother's favorite brooch and smiled like an adopted daughter. The will reading was the holy shit moment. The lawyer unsealed the document and read it aloud. Everything went to the woman. A note was attached. My mother wanted her to have the house so she could stay on and continue care. No mention of me. No mention of the times I held my mother's hand through chemo. No mention of the nights I lay awake counting pills to make sure she didn't overdose. My name was a blank spot in the life I had lived. I called my sister and she said calmly that the will was the will. Don't cause a scene. Don't embarrass mom. My sister's tone was the first time I felt abandoned in a different way. She wasn't the friend who told me to breathe anymore. She was the person who wanted peace. The woman had already told her story, how she rescued my mother. My sister believed the rescue, not the theft. I met with a lawyer 2 days later. She said contesting a will was messy but possible. You needed proof of undue influence, lack of capacity, or fraud. The instinct inside me sharpened like a blade. I had the late-night phone transcripts where my mother sounded confused, the emails where the woman suggested certain changes, the neighbor who said the woman forbade visitors. I had my therapist's notes about my mother's sudden personality change. I had a shoebox of small things that felt like evidence. We filed. The woman filed back with an affidavit from my mother's primary care physician, a notarized statement that mom was sound of mind the day she signed, and declarations from 3 friends saying the woman had been a godsend. The first court hearing was a shuffle of papers and leads to a bench trial. My lawyer tried to explain undue influence like it was a thing judges could see. The judge wanted facts. That's when the chaos began. The woman's friends started telling stories about me online. A friend of my sister tagged photos of my mother smiling at parties with the woman and wrote about how I had somehow never appreciated how happy mom was in her final years. My high school classmates reposted. I got calls from people I hadn't spoken to in a decade asking if I was sure I wasn't the problem. I got texts accusing me of lying for money. My landlord called 2 months into the case and said the owner wanted the place showing because of maintenance costs. Legal battles are expensive. I started missing rent. My day job hours shrank because I was in depositions in court. I slept on my friend Marco's couch more than my own room. Marco became my anchor. He listened when I cried. He drove me to hearings. He kept bringing me groceries and insisted that I eat, even when I said I couldn't stomach it. We hit a false victory at the deposition of the woman's housekeeper. She admitted in court that the woman had rewritten mom's medication schedule, that she often read letters addressed to mom aloud and told mom they were from friends when they weren't. The housekeeper described a change in my mother that sounded like manipulation. For the first time, the judge looked uncomfortable. The social worker's reports started to appear. People who had been silenced now talked. Then the woman's lawyer produced a handwriting expert and a late-night video of my mother reading a prepared statement, smiling and saying she wanted the woman to have everything. The expert testified the signature was authentic. The video seemed sincere. My lawyer argued the video was staged. The judge looked at both sides and could only decide on evidence, not feelings. The court record pages started multiplying. Pressure tightened. My sister started avoiding me. She said she couldn't handle family drama, that public fights would be humiliating. She stopped returning calls. Marco called her, and she said she wanted to keep peace. Allies vanished. The housekeeper retracted part of her statement the week before trial, claiming she had been misremembering. The woman's friends sat together in the courtroom like a small army. I remember sitting on the courthouse steps the night before the toughest hearing and feeling a symbolic death. Not the death of my mother, she was already gone, but the death of something inside me that had believed adults would do the right thing for each other. I thought of my teenage self, who had trusted that if you took care of someone, they'd take care of you back. That self felt like a ghost. I nearly quit. I nearly folded and walked away because the bills were piling, the public shaming had spread, and even my own sister called and asked me to stop. My lawyer told me to consider settlement. The woman offered a small payout and a promise to let me keep a few keepsakes. They wanted the house, too. It was a trap, packaged as a way out. The internal collapse hit the night I nearly accepted. Marco came over and found me with both wills side by side. I started to cry and told him I was tired of proving I existed to people who only needed me when it was convenient. He told me to take a breath and ask the question no one had asked. What did I actually want? Not money, not revenge, not validation from strangers. I wanted my mother's truth to be acknowledged. I wanted my own childhood to be named as stolen and seen. I chose a new strategy. We would stop relying only on legal technicalities. We went public but carefully, not social media rants. I went to the local paper with a folder of documents, my mother's letters, a caregiver log with inconsistent entries, emails where the woman suggested changes to account beneficiaries. The reporter wrote a piece that didn't sensationalize but laid out the facts. Suddenly, other people started stepping forward. An old neighbor gave us a CD with home videos. They were grainy small moments. My mother talking to my younger self, laughing in the yard, the woman always present in the background, touching my mother's shoulder. One clip was a private moment where my mother spoke directly to the camera and said she was scared about the woman being around money and suggested that she hadn't changed the will yet. That clip was raw and imperfect and very human. It wasn't a court expert. It was my mother alive on tape. We filed the CD as new evidence. The woman's camp attacked it as selective editing. The judge ordered an expert to verify authenticity. The expert confirmed the timestamps and the camera. The judge called the woman in and asked her to explain the changes. For the first time, the woman didn't have the neat script. Her voice faltered under oath. She said she loved my mother, that she'd only wanted to help. Then she admitted to urging my mother to make changes because she feared the estate would be split and the house sold. The hearing room leaned forward like a body. The climactic confrontation came in a small courtroom with my sister unexpectedly there and Marco sitting 2 rows back. I stood up and told the judge everything I'd felt for years, how I had been erased, how my mother had become a different person, how I had missed singing in the car and school plays because someone insisted I stay. I said the woman had been kind until she wasn't. I said my mother's choice mattered, but so did the context of that choice. The judge called for a mediation. The woman's lawyer finally offered to split the estate if she could live there for a year and maintain the property. The judge asked if my sister would take guardianship of the house in trust until the estate sold. My sister surprised me by agreeing, saying she hadn't known the full story until she heard that clip. She apologized to me in a way that felt like someone reaching across a broken fence and demanding the nails be pulled out. In the end, the court found that undue influence had affected the final will. The last will, prior to the woman's version, was reinstated. The house went into a trust that my sister oversaw. The woman received a portion for her caregiving services, money she used immediately to move into a smaller home. She lost the control she had built like a fortress. The outcome wasn't a fairy tale. I didn't get everything. Legal fees ate half of what was left. The house was sold to pay debts from my mother's medical bills. The woman sued for defamation but dropped it after the public evidence stack made her case weak. I lost years, a normal adolescence, and the idea that caring for someone guarantees care in return. But opposite the opening image, something calm arrived. I moved 3 towns over. I set boundaries with my sister and rebuilt honest conversations. I went to therapy and also to a support group for kids who raise parents. I learned how to say no. I learned how to be a person who isn't defined solely by caretaking. There was a final, private moment of closure. Marco and I drove to a small storage locker and took out a box of my mother's old things: recipes, a chipped teacup, a high school yearbook. I ran my fingers over her handwriting on an old grocery list. I said out loud that I forgave her for not fighting better, and I didn't forgive the woman. Forgiveness felt like cleaning a room rather than waving a magic wand. The woman ended up moving away. She called me once, a week after the settlement. She said she was sorry in that thin way people say sorry when they mean only their portion of suffering. I didn't call back. The thing I had been fighting to retrieve wasn't money. It was the right to tell my own history out loud. The court returned a set of facts, not my mother's life. The legal victory gave me breathing room. It didn't remake my childhood, but it put a name on the theft and made it visible. I got a box of keepsakes, a small trust that covers my therapy sessions, and a new sister who shows up more honestly now. People ask if the lawsuit was worth it. I say yes, because if I hadn't fought, I would have been erased twice. First by the woman, then by the paperwork. Winning didn't bring my mother back. It didn't fix nights I missed, but it gave me a stake in my story. It gave me the right to say she was loved and used and complicated. That truth is quiet now, but it's mine. I still have scars. I still flinch when someone offers to help. But now I know the difference between help that holds and help that takes. I know how to make boundaries. I know how to grieve a stolen childhood and start building a life that's mine instead.